We're going to be looking at a passage of Scripture today, the book of Job in the Old Testament, not Job, Job, long O, and it's a story that's really a drama, and it's not the easiest part of Scripture for 21st century Americans to figure out, partly because the whole book is a drama, a series of dialogues, and it would be easier to understand watching it acted out on a stage rather than just reading it in the book. That's the way it is with a lot of drama and screenplay. In my high school English class, it was a lot harder to make any sense out of Shakespeare on the pages of the book, but when I saw a movie with the play acted out, it made more sense. Well, Job is a little bit tough to figure out just reading it. It's also hard for us because it is so emotionally devastating. You know, whenever you watch a TV show, a movie, or read a book, you find yourself identifying with the main character or characters, and you want things to go well for them. You empathize with them, you root for them, and when something goes wrong, it impacts you, and Job was such a great guy. He was very successful in business. He would be a multimillionaire today, but he was also such a man of character and love and compassion and service to others, and he had such a great family, and you wanted everything to go well for Job. If ever a person deserved it, he did. And then, in rapid machine gun fashion, all kinds of disasters begin to happen to this poor but very admirable guy who just suffers one thing after another, and it's kind of heartbreaking. Job was probably written even before the early classic tragedies of ancient Greek literature, and before Shakespeare, Hamlet, and King Lear, and so on. But we know that these tragedies just are heartbreaking. And then, even more complicating, we find that the book of Job in the Bible has most of the important action occurring off stage, so to speak, in the spiritual realm in heaven. And the characters down on earth don't actually know what's really going on. It's like they're responding to everything in a fog. We, the reader, have the benefit of seeing the whole picture, but the characters in the drama don't. So it's quite an unusual book. Now we're going to take a look at it beginning towards the end of the first chapter, when already some things have occurred. And to present this gripping drama to us, I'll invite Jeff Fox to come forward.
Job lost all of his property, all of his livestock, and his children are dead. When Job heard this, he tore his clothes, then shaved his head because of his great sorrow. He knelt on the ground, then worshiped God. He said, "We bring nothing at birth. We take nothing with us at death. The Lord alone gives and takes. Praise the name of the Lord." In spite of everything, Job did not sin or accuse God of doing wrong. When the angels gathered around the Lord again, Satan was there with them. The Lord asked, "Satan, where have you been?" Satan replied, "I've been going all over the earth." The Lord asked, "What do you think of my servant Job? No one on earth is like him. He is a truly good person who respects me and refuses to do evil. In fact, he hasn't changed, even though you persuaded me to destroy him for no reason." Satan answered, "Pain. There's no pain like your own. People, they'll do anything to stay alive. Try striking Job's own body with pain, and he will curse you to your face." "All right," the Lord answered. "Make Job suffer as much as you want, but just don't kill him." Satan left and caused painful sores to break out all over Job's body, from head to toe. Then Job sat on the ash heap to show his sorrow. And while he was scraping his sores with a broken piece of pottery, his wife asked, "Why do you still trust God? Why don't you curse him and die?" Job replied, "Don't talk like a fool. If we accept blessings from God, we must accept trouble as well." In all that happened, Job never once said anything against God. This is the word of the Lord.
Fresh from his great triumph, leading the American troops to victory in the First World War in France, General John Blackjack Pershing returned to America and went on an inspection tour of stateside army bases. One day near dusk, he arrived at Fort Riley in Kansas and found an entire infantry division standing at attention to honor their great hero. The general motioned to the bugler for the unit, and when he came close, the general whispered to him, "Do you know how to play the Army's fire alarm signal?" "Yes, sir," he replied. "Good. I want you to meet me at my quarters at 0500 tomorrow morning." The soldiers were dismissed, but as you can guess, the bugler could not keep this quiet. And he told everybody. And it spread through all the camp like wildfire that General Pershing was going to call a surprise fire alarm at dawn the next morning. And so everybody in the unit spit and polished themselves to be ready to perform. And the fire unit actually slept in their uniforms, having made all of their equipment ready. At 0500, the bugler showed up with his instrument, and General Pershing said, "Son, play Reveille," which was the military wake-up call, kind of the rooster's call for soldiers. Gulp. As the bugler's first notes were blasted for the wake-up call, the doors of the fire station swung open and the fire wagon came racing out. And the general laughed. It was a great trick. But you see, he had never actually said he was going to sound a fire drill. They had jumped to that conclusion, which is what we're talking about today, jumping to conclusions. We all have done it. We all do it. Some of us would honestly admit that's the best way we get our exercise, by jumping to conclusions. It's just what human beings tend to do. With a little bit of information, they conclude, and sometimes wrongly, including very smart, knowledgeable people. Maybe you remember, it was a couple decades ago, I think, when some scientists, a couple chemists working at the University of Utah laboratories, were doing some random experiments, and they, in a certain way, ran an electric charge through a beaker of heavy water, and the results surprised them. And it appeared as if they had discovered what had been labeled cold fusion, the holy grail of the energy industry. If we could find a way to produce an endless series of energy emissions without the dangerous explosion of nuclear fission, if you could accomplish cold fusion, it would change the world. And these two scientists were so excited about this that they hastily fired off a patent application, and then they called a news conference to announce the groundbreaking results, confident that what lay before them would be fame, Nobel Prizes, and billions in riches. The only problem was that they were not able to replicate the results in any of their subsequent experiments, nor were any other scientists around the world ever to achieve those results they had claimed. Oops. They jumped to conclusions, didn't they? And ultimately, their reputations were in tatters. Jumping to conclusions is what we do in our personal relationships. I have no idea how many fights and disagreements between husband and wife or between parents and kids have resulted from not really understanding what the other said or what they meant or what they did, but jumping to the wrong conclusion and expectation. It happens all the time. We see lots and lots of conflicts emerge in this way. I'll bet a lot of you, like I, typically in December, will rewatch that Christmas classic, White Christmas. And you know that at the very center of the plot of that movie is Rosemary Clooney overhearing only part of a phone conversation Bing Crosby is having and jumping to the wrong conclusion, and it blows up their relationship and they're mad at each other and it's just a terrible misunderstanding before it's finally resolved. Is this not common? How many times have we gotten angry at somebody and we don't know the whole story? It happens all the time in politics and in media. A year ago, the news bulletin came out that a police officer in Columbus had shot a black woman. With just that bulletin, basketball player and self-proclaimed social justice warrior LeBron James fired off all kinds of angry tweets. We're coming to get you. That's it. We've had it. It's time for an insurrection. And then, a few minutes later, the story was fleshed out. That black woman who was shot had been holding a knife to the throat of another black woman, threatening to kill her. The officer summoned to the scene warned her to drop the knife. She refused, and what really happened was that the officer acted to save an innocent life. He wasn't in the wrong. He did the right thing. Well, we jumped to the wrong conclusion, didn't we? Do you recall when, I think it was a couple years ago, the big cable network CNN slandered a student from a Catholic high school in Kentucky who had been in Washington, D.C. for some event, and they labeled him a racist, and they said he's a symbol of everything that's wrong in this country, and ultimately CNN had to pay a huge amount of money in a settlement of a defamation lawsuit, which they really did not want to go to the jury for a public trial, all because some editor or some reporter jumped to a conclusion that was incorrect. Oh, it happens all the time, but of most concern to me is the way we humans have a tendency to jump to the wrong conclusion in the spiritual realm and in our relationship with God and in response to things happening in our lives. And so I want to identify what I think are three of the most dangerous wrong conclusions we are tempted to leap to. And the first one is to conclude that God doesn't love us, or He can't help us, or He's allowed something terrible to happen because He's turned away from us, and it causes so many people to be angry and bitter at God. There may be some people here in this room who are carrying around a lingering resentment at God. Why didn't you do what I wanted you to? Or why did you let this happen? And it's a common wrong reaction to think that God doesn't love us because something has happened of which inevitably we only know a little portion and cannot see the future, but we jump to that conclusion. A number of years ago, I was living in another city, and I got to know a guy who was working out at the same gym I went to, and we became friends. He attended a different church than I, but he was a Christian, and we had a lot of good things to share, and he was doing very well in his career. He had a beautiful family of 2 daughters. His wife had been told when she gave birth to their younger daughter that she probably wouldn't be able to have any more children. But surprisingly, she became pregnant with a baby boy. And he was so excited. Oh, a son, he can follow in my athletic footsteps. This is going to be great. And then a few months into the pregnancy, the baby miscarried. And he took it hard. He was really upset and angry at God and bitter at how the Lord could allow that to happen. And he told his wife, "We're not going to church anymore. That's it." Well, I'm not normally this direct, but we had a relationship, and I decided to be candid with him. So we talked one day in the locker room, and I said, "JT, I think you're looking at this the wrong way. You're not hurting God by being angry at him. You're only hurting yourself and your family. You need to see that this is not God punishing you. And besides, 6 months ago, you freely told everybody how much God had blessed you with your wonderful family. You have these 2 beautiful daughters. Some of us weren't blessed with children, and look at how you're blessed. Maybe you need to stop focusing on your disappointment and remind yourself of your blessings." I hope that our pretty honest conversation helped him to refocus and adjust his attitude a little bit. Well, that's one of the ways in which we can jump to the wrong conclusion, thinking God is punishing us or hasn't loved us or is being mean to us. A second is jumping to the conclusion that every problem is all bad automatically. Every challenge, everything we didn't expect to happen, everything that's difficult or painful is automatically going to be for our worse, and it will never get better. This is a natural conclusion, but so many of us here in this room and watching us on live stream know that in fact our lives, as we look back, have not been just an example of one bad thing after another, but indeed some of the hardest challenges have led to the greatest rewards. Some of the most difficult problems we've faced have made us better. God has actually worked in those things that we thought were going to be to our harm, and they turned out to be for our blessing. The hardest crisis I had to face in my youth was when, as a teenager, my parents got a divorce, really a shock to me. My mother moved our small family of myself and my younger sister and her across the country from California to Pennsylvania to move in with her mother, and it seemed devastating to me to lose that contact with my father and all my friends, except that I quickly made some new friends in my new school who invited me to come to the youth ministry in their local church, and it was there that for the first time I heard God wanted to have a relationship with me, and He would be my perfect father. And it changed my life. It was a hard thing, but it led to so many good things. Can you point to something difficult that led to a blessing? Don't jump to the conclusion that all problems are bad. And third, don't jump to the conclusion that when things are going well, you don't need God. I've got this taken care of. I'm self-sufficient. I'm invincible. After all, if I'm healthy now, I'll always be healthy, right? Nothing bad can happen, and I can handle it. It is so easy when we are on the good cycle to think it will never end and we will have no need. Be careful about that false conclusion. It will take you away from the kind of living by faith that keeps you strong and close to the Lord, so that whenever that unexpected thing comes, you're ready and you're bolstered by his presence. Okay, those are 3 wrong conclusions to avoid. When I see the example of this amazing, courageous, strong, tough, faithful man who was able to walk by faith and not by sight in the midst of terrible tragedy, this guy Job never jumped to those conclusions. He never turned his back on God. He never got angry. He never got bitter. He never blamed the Lord. And he consciously recognized God lets things happen for his purpose, which I can't understand. And Job was really an example. Look again at what he said in verse 10, the last verse of our text. If we accept blessings from God, we must accept trouble as well. It's part of life. But we've had the benefit, if we have read our Bibles, of knowing how the story ends. And actually, the final chapter finds Job passing his test and being rewarded and restored and blessed even more than at the beginning. He did not lose his faith. He hung in there, and God was with him. A Christian author by the name of Max Lucado was for years in his early career in ministry a missionary and pastor in Brazil. And he learned some of the Brazilian folk tales, and he tells one of them in a book he's written entitled The Wisdom of the Woodcutter. The story goes like this. There was a poor woodcutter in a village. That was his only job. He would cut firewood from the forest and deliver it to people for their homes. He didn't make much money. He barely got by, providing for himself, his wife, and his only son. But he had one asset. He had a beautiful white horse. The villagers said to the woodcutter, "Why don't you sell your horse? You can make some money and you can have a better, more comfortable life." But he said, "I couldn't do that. That horse is my friend." Well, one day, the horse was not there. And the villagers said to him, "You are a fool, woodcutter. You should have sold it while you had the chance. Someone has stolen your horse, and now you'll get nothing for it." And the woodcutter replied, "How do you know? All we really know is that the horse is not here today. We see only a fragment. We don't know what will happen. And so we will wait and be patient." A couple weeks later, the white horse returned with 12 wild horses following it. The horse had not been stolen. It had gone off into the wild, but had returned with all of these other horses. And the villagers said, "Oh, you were right, woodcutter. This is wonderful. Why, what a blessing. You can train these 12 horses and you can sell them and you'll be rich." "We don't know if this is a blessing or not," the woodcutter replied calmly. "All we know is that the horse has come back with other horses. All we see is a fragment. We do not know the whole story. We will be patient and we will wait." A couple weeks later, in the process of training those wild horses, the woodcutter's son was thrown from a horse and badly fractured both legs. And this seemed like a terrible tragedy, for given the state of medicine, it wasn't sure that he would be able to walk again without a limp. And so the people of the village consoled the woodcutter. "This is terrible. What an awful tragedy. These 12 wild horses have been a curse to you." And the woodcutter replied, "We do not know that. All we know is that my son has been injured, but we can only see a fragment. We do not know how it all will turn out. We will be patient and we will wait." And then 2 weeks later, a war broke out with a nearby other country. And the king, desperate for soldiers, forced all of the young men of the village to join his army, except the woodcutter's son. And the people of the village were in mourning for their sons, believing that the enemy being strong and the likelihood of defeat in the war being great, that their sons would all be killed or captured and they would never see them again. And so in mourning, they came to the woodcutter and said, "Oh, you are so blessed that your son alone was spared." And he replied, "We do not know that. We can only see a fragment. We will be patient, and we will wait, and we will see." That woodcutter had the wisdom to not respond impulsively, jumping to conclusions prematurely, but had the wisdom to know that life as it unfolds cannot be known in process, but that the solution is to be patient and to wait. Where did the woodcutter get such wisdom? Well, Max Lucado says, perhaps it was from another woodcutter, a carpenter from Nazareth, to be precise, who had the perspective to know that his time, including those hours on that hard wooden cross, were a part of God's plan. You know, it was a dark Friday when it appeared that all had been lost, when the woodcutter from Galilee hung on that instrument of torture and his enemies celebrated, and the demons in hell threw a big party for their great victory over God, and the disciples were devastated. And then on the third day, on that Sunday morning, everything changed. It was not the final chapter, that cross. God was still at work and still had other chapters to write. And the same is true for you and for you and for me. The same is true that God is still at work, writing the story of our lives. And we can't see what will come next, but we can choose to trust. We can choose to believe that God isn't finished. In fact, if we've read the book, we know that the last chapter for all of us is going to be the best of all, as it was for Job. And until then, we can choose the wisdom of resisting the temptation to jump to the wrong conclusions, and instead to walk by faith and not by sight.
By faith we'll see the hand of God in the light of creation's grand design, in the lives of those who prove his faithfulness, who walk by faith and not by sight. By faith the prophets saw a day when the longed-for Messiah would appear, with the power to break the chains of sin and death, and rise triumphant from the grave. We will stand as children of the promise. We will fix our eyes on Christ, our soul's reward, till the race is finished and the work is done. We'll walk by faith and not by sight.
By faith the church was called to go
shall be moved, and the power of the gospel shall prevail. For we know in Christ all things are possible, for all who call upon his name.
We will stand as children of the promise.
We will fix our eyes on Christ, our soul's reward, till the race is finished and the work is done. We'll walk by faith and not by sight. We will stand as children of the promise. We will fix our eyes on Christ, our soul's reward, till the race is finished and the work is done. We'll walk by faith and not by sight. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, your mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
By faith we see the hand of God.
By faith we see the hand of God.
By faith this mountain shall be moved.
By faith this mountain shall be moved.
We'll walk by faith.
We'll walk by faith and not by sight.